The night we were ordered to move our battery toward Prasaut Bridge. Nobody had to explain how serious things were. The radio operator had barely finished reading the message before our battery commander folded the map, looked at each of us, and simply said, "Pack everything. We move now." I was the number 1 gunner on a 105mm howitzer attached to a supporting artillery battalion working alongside the 9th Division. By then, we'd been in Cambodia long enough to recognize the difference between an ordinary fire mission and one that carried real urgency. This one felt different. Reports coming over the field radio said the infantry holding the bridge was under increasing pressure. If artillery support didn't arrive soon, they might lose the crossing before sunrise. Our gun crew consisted of 4 men who had become more like brothers than soldiers. Sergeant Hung, our section chief, had been a high school history teacher before the war. He spoke quietly, never wasted words, and somehow remained calm no matter how bad things became. Whenever someone started to panic, all he had to do was glance our way, and we settled down. Loy was our radio operator. He carried an old dented canteen that looked like it had survived 3 different wars. A jagged piece of metal had crushed one side during an earlier mortar attack, but it never leaked a drop. He joked that it was luckier than any of us and refused every offer to replace it. Then there was Tam, the youngest member of the crew, barely 20 years old. He constantly talked about opening a motorcycle repair shop once he got home. Whenever we stopped long enough to rest, he'd sketch little engine parts in a worn notebook instead of writing letters. By midnight, we had hitched the howitzer behind a military truck and began crawling through narrow jungle trails. The rainy season had turned the road into thick mud. Several times the truck's wheels spun uselessly while the heavy gun sank deeper into the ground. Every man climbed down, shoulder against steel, boots disappearing into the mud as we shoved with every ounce of strength we had. Nobody complained. We all understood that somewhere ahead, infantrymen were counting on guns they couldn't even see. Hours passed with nothing but the rumble of the truck, the chorus of insects, and the distant sound of artillery echoing across the forest. Every now and then we'd stop to listen. Sometimes we could hear bursts of automatic rifle fire far beyond the trees. Other times the jungle fell into an uneasy silence that somehow felt even worse. Just before dawn we finally reached a small clearing overlooking the approaches to Prasaut Bridge. The air smelled of wet earth, broken bamboo, and burned gunpowder drifting from somewhere ahead. We unloaded ammunition 1 crate at a time while our boots slipped in the soaked ground. Breakfast was nothing more than dried rice softened with canteen water. Nobody had much appetite anyway. My hands were already stained with grease from checking the breech, and sweat mixed with the damp jungle air until my uniform clung to my skin. Hung spread the fire direction map across an ammunition crate while Lloyd tested the field radio for what felt like the 100th time. Everything depended on getting the gun into action before daylight exposed our position. Then the radio suddenly crackled to life. The voice on the other end was strained, almost drowned out by explosions. "If your battery is delayed another 10 minutes. There was a pause. "The bridge may be lost." The clearing near Prasaut Bridge was no real artillery position. It was just a patch of wet ground between trees, barely wide enough for the howitzer, the truck, and a few men moving in the dark. But in war, you often used whatever ground you were given. A good position was a luxury. A usable one was enough. Sergeant Hung pointed his flashlight toward the ground, shielding the beam with his hand so it would not shine through the trees. He studied the slope, the tree line, and the narrow trail behind us. "We set the gun here," he said, muzzle toward the bridge approach. "Keep the truck under cover. No loud talking." That was all. We moved fast, but not carelessly. Artillery work had its own rhythm. Every man knew his place. Tam and I unhooked the trail legs and helped swing the gun into position. Lloyd dragged the radio set and wire spool toward a shallow dip behind a fallen log. Two other men from the ammunition detail carried shell crates under a tarp and stacked them low, away from the gun, just as we had been taught. The mud made everything harder. The spades at the end of the trails would not bite firm ground. Each time we tried to seat the gun, the wet earth gave way and the steel sank unevenly. Hung crouched beside the left trail, pressed his fingers into the mud, and shook his head. Too soft. Bring branches. Bamboo too. We cut what we could without making noise, laying bamboo and split wood under the trails to spread the weight. My hands were slick with mud and gun grease. Leeches clung to our ankles. Mosquitoes whined around our ears. None of that mattered. What mattered was that when the first round left the tube, the gun had to stay steady. Behind us, Loy was fighting with the radio. I could hear the faint hiss of static and his low voice calling the forward observer. His dented canteen hung from his belt, knocking softly against the radio frame each time he moved. Usually he would have made a joke about it, but that morning he said nothing. That worried me more than the distant gunfire. We dug shallow gun pits with entrenching tools, cutting into the damp soil until the smell of wet earth rose heavy around us. It was a smell I would never forget, not clean like rain in a rice field back home, but sour, mixed with sweat, smoke, and old leaves rotting underfoot. Tam worked beside me, breathing hard. He had been fighting fever for 2 days, but he refused to report sick. In the dim light, his face looked pale and drawn. "You all right?" I whispered. He nodded. "When this is over, I'll sleep for a week." "You always say that. And one day I'll do it." We both smiled, but only for a second. Hung unfolded the firing map over an ammunition crate and weighed down the corners with 2 shell casings. His finger moved carefully along the grid lines. He checked the bridge, the river bend, the road approach, and the likely enemy line of movement. Then he called out the first deflection and elevation for registration. I repeated the numbers back to him. That was our rule. No guesswork, no pride. Every number spoken had to be confirmed. A wrong setting could kill the men we were trying to protect. By then, gray light was beginning to show through the canopy. Birds started calling somewhere in the trees, strangely calm, as if they did not know men were preparing to tear the morning apart. We had no proper breakfast. Just dried rice softened with water from a battered canteen. I swallowed a few mouthfuls while checking the breech block, then wiped my hands on my pants and returned to the gun. Suddenly, Loy raised one hand. Forward observer on the line. Hung stepped over quickly and took the handset. He listened, then looked at us. His voice stayed calm, but his eyes changed. "Fire mission. Immediate support. Infantry is pinned near the bridge." Tam reached for the first shell. I leaned into the sight. The war had found us before the sun had fully risen. Tam lifted the first shell from the stack as carefully as if he were carrying something alive. In artillery, a shell was never just a piece of steel. It was weight, math, timing, and responsibility. Once it left the barrel, no man could call it back. Sergeant Hung stood beside the firing map, one hand on the ammunition crate, the other holding a grease pencil. Lloyd crouched near the radio, headset pressed tight against one ear. Static hissed through the handset, broken now and then by the voice of the forward observer near Prasaut Bridge. Infantry pinned down. Enemy fire from tree line east of the road. Request immediate suppression. Hung did not hurry. That was what I remember most. The world around us sounded like it was coming apart, but he moved with the calm of a man measuring boards in a classroom. He repeated the coordinates, checked the grid, then gave us the first firing data. Deflection. Elevation, 1 round. High explosive, at my command. I leaned into the sight and brought the gun onto line. My fingers were slick with sweat and mud, but the training held. Numbers first, breathing second, fear later. Deflection set, I said. Tam slid the shell forward. The metallic sound of it entering the breech was low and final. I locked the breech block and stepped clear. Ready. Hung raised his hand, listened once more to Loy, then dropped it. Fire. The howitzer kicked back hard, and the jungle cracked open. Flame jumped from the muzzle. Smoke rolled over us, sharp and bitter. The recoil drove the gun against the wet ground, but the bamboo under the trails held. For a second, all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. Loy pressed the headset tighter. Observer reports impact. Short by 50. Add 50. Repeat. Add 50. Hung nodded without emotion. Correct. Add 50. We worked faster now. Tam brought up the next shell. I adjusted the elevation. Another round went out. Then another. Each shot shook leaves from the trees above us. Dirt fell from the edge of the shallow gun pit. Somewhere beyond the jungle, our shells were landing near men we could not see, men in our own uniform. Lying low, waiting for our fire to give them room to breathe. After the fourth round, the radio message changed. Good impact. Enemy fire reduced. Infantry moving. No one cheered. We had learned not to celebrate too early. In a place like that, relief could be taken away in the time it took to load another shell. Still, I felt something loosen in my chest. The first mission had worked. The gun was steady. The line was open. The infantry was moving. Tam wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist. His face was pale, but his eyes were bright. See, he said quietly. She shoots straight. He always called the gun, she, like it was an old truck he planned to repair after the war. Hung allowed himself the faintest smile. Then Loy stiffened. New target coming in. He began writing the coordinates on a scrap of paper. His pencil moved fast, then stopped. He looked at the numbers again, frowning. Hung took the paper from him and compared it with the map. His expression changed just slightly, but enough for me to notice. The new coordinates placed the target close to the bridge road. Too close for comfort. Maybe the enemy had shifted. Maybe our infantry had advanced faster than expected. Or maybe one number had been spoken wrong through the static. Outside the gun pit, the morning was fully awake now. Sunlight filtered through the trees. Smoke hung low over the wet ground. The bridge fight continued in the distance. Tam already had another shell in his arms. Hold, Hung said. That single word froze all of us. The radio crackled again, urgent and broken. Fire mission. Repeat. Fire mission. Hung did not answer right away. His eyes stayed on the map. Then he said, very quietly, not yet. Hung kept his finger on the map and did not move. That was how I knew something was wrong. In artillery, hesitation could be dangerous, but firing too quickly could be worse. A shell did not care who was under it. Once we sent it into the sky, it belonged to gravity, powder, and whatever mistake a man had made before pulling the lanyard. Loy pressed the headset against his ear. Say again, he called into the handset. Repeat the coordinates. Repeat slowly. Static answered first. Then came the forward observer's voice, chopped into pieces by explosions near the bridge. Grid. 7. 4. 2. East tree line. Enemy regrouping. Fire now. Loy wrote it down again, his pencil digging so hard into the paper that the tip snapped. He cursed under his breath, grabbed another pencil, and looked at Hung. The numbers still did not sit right. Hung crouched lower over the ammunition crate. The map was damp at the edges, and the grid lines had begun to blur from sweat and morning mist. He wiped one corner with his sleeve and checked the last confirmed infantry position. Then he checked the new target again. His jaw tightened. That puts impact too close to the road, he said. Tam still held the shell at his chest. His arms were trembling, partly from the weight, partly from fever. Maybe our boys moved back, he asked. Maybe, Hung said, or maybe one digit is wrong. No one spoke after that. The sound from the bridge rolled through the jungle like thunder trapped under the trees. Rifle fire. Machine guns, mortars, men shouting somewhere too far away to understand. We could not see the infantry, but we knew they were there, pressed into the mud, waiting for us to answer. The radio cracked again. Artillery, fire mission, immediate, we are taking heavy fire. Loy looked at Hung. I looked at the shell in Tam's arms. Every second felt stolen from someone else. Hung took the handset. Observer, confirm friendly forward line. The reply came broken. Friendly line. Near road bend. Repeat, near road bend. Hung's finger stopped on the map. Near the road bend. The same road bend that sat dangerously close to the coordinates we had just received. I felt my stomach go cold. If we fired the way the numbers were written, that round might not land on Pon Pot fighters. It might land on our own infantry. Men from the 9th Division. Men who had trusted us without ever seeing our faces. Hung handed the set back to Loy and spoke to me. Do not fire. I nodded, but my throat was dry. Tam lowered the shell carefully onto the ground. He did it slowly, like setting down a sleeping child. For a moment, the war seemed to pause around our little gun pit. The smoke hung low. The wet earth smelled sour and heavy. Somewhere above us, birds scattered from the trees after another distant blast. I remember thinking how strange it was that 4 tired men and 1 muddy map could hold so many lives in their hands. Loy kept calling. Observer, confirm second digit. Is it 4 or 9? Repeat second digit, 4 or 9. Only static came back. Then, faintly, a voice broke through. Correction. Correction. Grid 792. Repeat 792. Hung closed his eyes for half a second. Not in prayer, just relief. The wrong digit had moved the impact point hundreds of meters. New data, he said. His voice was calm again, but I saw his hand shake once before he hit it against his leg. I reset the sight. Tam lifted the shell. Loy repeated the corrected grid twice. Loud and clear. Hung checked the map one last time. Fire when ready. This time, when the gun roared, I felt the weight of that delayed shot more than the blast itself. We had lost nearly a minute. But we had not killed our own men. The corrected rounds went out clean. One after another, the howitzer bucked against the wet ground, and each time the bamboo under the trails groaned but held. Smoke settled around us in gray layers. The air tasted like burnt powder and damp leaves. My ears rang so badly that Loy's voice sounded as if it came from the bottom of a well. For a few minutes, the observer kept us informed. Impact good. Shift left 20. Infantry moving again. Keep fire on tree line. Those words gave us something to hold on to. We still could not see the fight at Prasaut Bridge, but through the radio we could almost picture it. Our infantry crawling forward along the road. Men dragging wounded friends into ditches. Machine gun fire cutting through the brush. Pon Pot fighters pulling back and then gathering again. Artillerymen fight by numbers, but we live by voices. A voice on the radio tells you where your shells land. A voice tells you whether you are saving men or endangering them. When that voice is gone, the map suddenly feels too flat, and the jungle becomes too large. The next message never came through clearly. Loy pressed the headset hard against his ear. Say again, you're breaking up. Static. Then a burst of sound. Thin and torn. Bridge. Smoke. Cannot. Then nothing. Loy adjusted the dials. He checked the wire. He slapped the side of the radio once. Not hard enough to break it. Just hard enough to show his anger. Line's weak, he said. Maybe the antenna got hit. Maybe they moved. Hung looked toward the direction of the bridge. His face did not change, but I knew he was counting seconds in his head. Try battalion net. Loy switched frequencies. More static. He called our battery command post. No answer. He called the observer again. Nothing but the dry hiss of a dead line. Tam leaned against the side of the gun pit, breathing through his mouth. His fever had come back. Sweat ran down his neck, though the morning air was still cool under the trees. I handed him my canteen. Drink. He took one swallow and gave it back. Save it. That was the way we lived then. Even water had to be argued over. Hung studied the map, then the bridge road, then the last known friendly position marked in grease pencil. We had already corrected one bad coordinate that morning. None of us had forgotten how close it had come. We continue only on confirmed targets, he said. No one argued. Discipline mattered most when fear pushed a man to act too fast. But the battlefield did not wait for us to feel certain. The sound from the bridge grew heavier. Mortar rounds thumped somewhere ahead. Rifle fire came in long, ripping bursts. Then we heard a different sound behind us, a hollow pop, followed by a rising whistle. Incoming, someone shouted. The first mortar round landed short, tearing branches from a tree 50 yards away. The second hit closer. Dirt slapped against my face and neck. The third exploded just behind the ammunition stack, throwing mud, leaves, and smoke over the tarp. Tam went down on one knee. I grabbed his shoulder and dragged him behind the gun shield. Lloyd curled over the radio set, protecting it with his own body as if it were a wounded man. Hung shouted for everyone to stay low. For several seconds, the whole clearing disappeared in dust and smoke. When I lifted my head, the world looked different. The map was half buried in dirt. One ammunition crate had split open. Lloyd's headset cord had been cut by a piece of shrapnel. He stared at it, then looked at Hung. No line, he said. The bridge was still fighting. And we were suddenly alone with a gun, a muddy map, and no voice to guide our fire. The mortar barrage turned that little clearing into the place we later called hell. Not because of the size of the fight. Bigger battles happened in Cambodia. More guns fired elsewhere. More men moved across larger maps. But for those of us around that 105mm howitzer, with no radio line, no clear order, and the bridge still under attack, Prasaut became the whole war squeezed into a few yards of mud. The first thing I did was check the gun. That may sound cold, but artillery training gets into your bones. Men can panic. Steel must be inspected. If the breech was damaged, if the sight had shifted, if the trails had jumped out of position, every round after that could become a mistake. Mud covered the shield. Shrapnel had cut through some of the camouflage branches. One wheel was half buried, but the breech still opened clean. The sight mount was dirty but not broken. Gun can fire, I shouted. Hung crawled to the ammunition crate and pulled the map free from the dirt. One corner had torn off. The grease pencil marks were smeared, but the bridge road and the last confirmed enemy tree line could still be read. We fire by last confirmed data only, he said. No one liked it, but no one had a better answer. Loy was already working on the radio. The headset cord had been sliced almost in two. He stripped the rubber with his teeth, twisted the wires together with muddy fingers, and wrapped them in a piece of cloth torn from his own sleeve. His dented canteen lay beside him, half buried in dirt. He did not even look at it. Tam stumbled to the shell stack. His fever had drained the color from his face. A thin line of blood ran from a cut above his ear. But when I reached for the shell, he pushed my hand away. I can load, he said. You can barely stand. I said I can load. There was no time to argue. Hung called out the old firing data. I repeated it back. My voice sounded strange to me. Flat and dry. The world had narrowed to numbers, steel, and the rhythm of our hands. Tam passed the shell forward. I shoved it home. The breech locked. Fire. The gun roared. Before the smoke cleared, another mortar round landed near the rear of the clearing. The blast threw dirt over the open ammunition crate. Someone yelled that the tarp was burning. I turned and saw a small flame licking at torn canvas near the spare charges. That was the moment fear truly grabbed me. A burning tarp was not the problem. Fire near propellant charges was. If it spread, the whole stack could go. We would not have time to run far enough. Hung saw it too. Put it out. I grabbed a wet sandbag and ran low. Another shell burst somewhere beyond the trees, close enough to knock me sideways. I hit the ground hard, tasted mud, then crawled the last few feet and slammed the sandbag over the flame. Smoke rose under my hands. Heat bit through the fabric. Behind me, Tam was trying to lift another round. Then his knees buckled. He went down beside the gun trail, still holding the shell against his chest. For 1 second, everything inside me split in two. The infantry needed fire, the gun needed loading, the ammunition needed protecting, and Tam was lying half exposed, too weak to move, while more rounds were coming in. Hung shouted something, but the blast noise swallowed the words. I looked at the bridge road on the torn map. Then I looked at Tam. That was the choice war gave me. Keep the gun firing, or save the boy who still dreamed of fixing motorcycles when all this was over. I chose Tam. There was no speech, no heroic thought, no grand feeling in my chest. I simply saw him lying in the mud with that shell still trapped against his body. And my legs moved before my mind finished arguing. The gun needed another round. The infantry near Prasaut Bridge needed fire. Hung needed me on the site. I knew all of that. But Tam was one of us. He was the kid who talked about motorcycle engines during quiet nights. The one who saved bits of wire and broken bolts because he said nothing mechanical was ever truly useless. I could not leave him there. I ran low through the smoke, grabbed the shell first, and rolled it away from his chest. Then I hooked both hands under his arms and dragged him toward the shallow pit behind the gun shield. He was heavier than he looked. Mud held his boots like hands. His eyes were open, but they did not seem to focus. Stay with me, I told him. You hear me? Stay awake. He tried to answer. Only a dry sound came out. Another mortar round hit beyond the tree line. The blast threw dirt across his face. I wiped it away with my sleeve and pulled him the last few feet into cover. Behind me, Hung had already made his decision too. "Loy," he shouted, "on ammunition." Loy dropped the useless radio headset and ran to the shell stack. He was not a loader by trade, but every artilleryman knew enough to keep a gun alive. His hands were shaking, yet he lifted the next shell and brought it forward. Hung took my place at the site. That was not how we normally worked. A gun crew survives by routine. Each man has his job, and the job has to be done the same way every time. Especially under fire. But war has a way of breaking clean lines. When one man falls, another man steps over and does what must be done. I pressed Tam down behind the shield and checked the cut near his ear. It was bleeding, but not badly. The fever worried me more. His skin was hot enough to scare me. "I told you I'd sleep for a week," he whispered. I almost laughed, but my throat tightened instead. "Not here," I said. "You sleep after we leave this place." The gun fired again. The blast rolled over us. Hung had switched to fewer rounds, spaced farther apart, using the last confirmed data. He was not trying to blanket the whole tree line anymore. We did not have enough ammunition for that. And without the radio, we could not afford blind firing. Each shell had to mean something. That was the burden of artillery. People imagined it was only noise and power. But the real weight was restraint. Knowing when not to fire. Knowing one wrong correction could tear apart the men you were trying to save. Knowing every round used up steel, powder, labor, and trust. Loy came back for another shell. His dented canteen swung from his belt, striking his thigh with a dull clank. His face was black with smoke. "Radio still dead," he said. Hung nodded without looking away from the site. Then we fire only what we know. A small fire still smoked near the damaged ammunition tarp. I crawled over and threw more wet dirt onto it until the last ember disappeared. My palms stung from heat and grit. When I looked back at Tam, he had pushed himself up on one elbow. "Don't even think about it," I said. He shook his head weakly. "I can pass charges. You can stay alive." For once, he obeyed. The barrage eased for a moment. Not stopped, just eased. That was when the silence between explosions became almost worse than the blasts themselves. We could hear the bridge fight again, distant, ragged, desperate. Hung lowered the sight slightly and checked the map. "We have to save rounds," he said. "If they ask for one more fire mission, it may be the last one we can give." No one answered. Out there, men were still waiting for us. Beside me, Tam closed his eyes but kept breathing. I remember thinking that sometimes survival was not a victory. Sometimes it was only a delay, bought with mud, blood, and the choice to hold on for one more round. We were down to a handful of shells. I remember looking at them under the torn tarp and feeling a strange kind of shame. As if we had failed the men at the bridge by not having more to give. Artillerymen are taught to count everything: rounds, charges, fuses, minutes, distance. But in that clearing, each shell felt less like ammunition and more like a promise we might not be able to keep. Loy was still bent over the radio, working with the patience of a man repairing a watch in the middle of a storm. The headset cord had been tied, twisted, and wrapped with cloth. Mud covered his fingers. Blood marked one knuckle where the wire had cut him. Then the set gave a weak crackle. At first, none of us moved. We were afraid to believe it. Loy froze, turned the dial a hair, and pressed the handset against his ear. A voice came through, thin and broken. "Battery, do you copy?" Loy's eyes widened. "Copy. This is gun position. Send traffic. Send traffic." Static swallowed the next few words. Then we heard enough. Infantry pulling back from forward ditch. Enemy pushing along east tree line. Need blocking fire. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Hung took the handset. Confirm friendly line. The answer came in pieces. But Loy wrote it down as fast as he could. Friendly troops were falling back toward the road bend. The Pon Pot force was moving from the trees toward the same stretch of road. If they reached it first, our infantry could be cut off before they crossed back toward the bridge. Hung looked at the map. The paper was torn, damp, and scarred with old marks. Still, he found the line. "We fire short pattern," he said, "not close to the road. We walk it back along the tree line." He looked at me. Every setting confirmed. I nodded. Tam was sitting behind the shield, pale as ash, but awake. He tried to rise again. I gave him one look, and he stopped. Loy left the radio and moved to the shell stack. He and I carried the first round together. Hung read the data slowly, as if the whole war had narrowed down to his voice. Deflection. I repeated it. Elevation. I repeated that too. Charge. Confirmed. The first shell went out. The blast shoved smoke through the clearing. Loy jumped back to the radio. Observer reports impact. Right edge of tree line. Good. Repeat. Repeat. We fired again. This time, I could feel the gun shifting slightly in the mud. The bamboo under the trails had cracked. I kicked wet dirt against the left trail and shouted for Loy to brace it with a broken ammo crate. He did it without a word. Another round. Then another. The radio came alive in bursts. Enemy slowing. Keep fire. Infantry moving. Hung adjusted each shot with small corrections. Not wild, not desperate. Small, careful changes. That was his gift. Even with mortar smoke in his eyes and our ammunition almost gone. He did not let fear pull the gun off its work. We had 2 shells left. Then 1. Loy looked at the empty stack and swallowed hard. Hung stared at the map for a long second. He knew what the last round meant. After that, we would have only the gun itself and our rifles. The radio crackled. Last group crossing. Enemy close. Fire one more. Hung did not answer right away. He checked the friendly line again. He checked the tree line. He checked the road bend where our men were trying to escape. Then he gave the final data. I set the sight with hands that no longer felt like mine. Loy brought the last shell. Together, we loaded it. Hung lowered his hand. Fire. The howitzer roared one last time. After the blast, there was no cheer. No one slapped anyone on the back. We listened. For several seconds, only static came through. Then the observer's voice returned. Faint but clear enough. Good fire. Last group through. Bridge still held. Loy sat down hard in the mud. Tam closed his eyes. Hung folded the ruined map with both hands. I looked at the empty shell crates and felt older than I had that morning. We had saved the crossing for a little while longer. But the price of those minutes was written on every face around that gun. The order to pull out came after dark. By then, the clearing no longer looked like a gun position. It looked like a place that had been chewed up and spat back out. The camouflage branches were shredded. The ground around the trails had been pounded into black mud. Empty shell crates lay open like broken boxes after a storm. Smoke still clung low to the trees. And every breath tasted of powder, sweat, and wet earth. Loy received the order on the repaired radio, though every word came through with static wrapped around it. Move to alternate position. Withdraw gun. Evacuate wounded. No lights. No lights. That meant no mistakes either. We worked by touch more than sight. Hung moved among us quietly, checking every man, every strap, every piece of gear. He had us gather what ammunition scraps remained, destroy anything we could not carry, and cover the deeper marks left by the gun wheels. It was not perfect. Nothing was perfect by then. But an artillery crew never left a position carelessly if there was any strength left to do it right. Tam could stand, but only with help. He kept insisting he could walk on his own. Save your pride for your motorcycle shop, I told him. He gave me a weak smile. First repair is free for you. You'll charge Loy double. Loy, crouched beside the radio set, snorted, only if he fixes my canteen too. For the first time all day, we almost sounded like ourselves. But the laugh died quickly. Beyond the trees, toward Prasaut Bridge, flares rose and faded. Their pale light showed pieces of the road, the riverbank, and the broken outline of the bridge itself. I saw movement down there, stretcher teams, infantrymen coming back in small groups, men limping with arms over each other's shoulders. Some walked in silence, some did not walk at all. That sight stayed with me longer than the gunfire. When you are behind a howitzer, you often know the battle only by coordinates and radio voices. You hear, target suppressed, or, infantry moving, and you hold on to those words because you need them to mean something. But when we withdrew from Prasaut, I saw the cost of those words. I saw young faces gray with exhaustion. I saw bandages soaked dark. I saw helmets carried in hands instead of worn on heads. No one spoke much after that. We hitched the howitzer to the truck with ropes and chains slick from mud. One wheel had sunk deep, and for a while I thought we would never pull it free. Hung had us dig under it with entrenching tools. Loy pushed with his shoulder against the wheel. I braced the trail leg. Even Tam, feverish and unsteady, leaned in with one hand until Hung barked at him to get back. The truck finally lurched forward. The gun groaned out of the mud. As we moved, I looked back at the shallow pit where Tam had fallen and where I had made my choice. In the dark, it was only a patch of broken earth. By morning, rain might soften it, leaves would fall over it, the jungle would hide the tracks and scars. But I knew I would never forget it. We moved slowly through the trees, following the narrow trail toward the alternate position. The night insects had begun again, loud and steady, as if the forest was trying to cover what men had done there. My uniform was stiff with dried mud. My hands shook from exhaustion. Each step felt borrowed. After a few hundred yards, Loy stopped and bent down near the trail. "What is it?" I whispered. He picked something from the mud and wiped it on his sleeve. His dented canteen. The strap had snapped during the barrage, and none of us had noticed. One side was scraped raw, marked by a fresh piece of shrapnel. But when Loy shook it, water still moved inside. He held it for a long moment, then clipped it back to his belt with wire. "Still doesn't leak," he said. Nobody answered. Some things survived without reason. Some men did not. And we kept walking. Many years have passed since Prasaut Bridge, but some mornings still bring me back there. It does not take much. The smell of wet soil after rain. The sound of distant thunder rolling over low hills. The sharp metal click of a tool being dropped on concrete. Those little things can open a door inside me, and suddenly I am no longer an old man sitting at home. I am back beside that 105mm gun, with mud on my hands, smoke in my throat, and the bridge somewhere beyond the trees. People sometimes ask veterans what the worst part of war was. They expect an answer about fear, or explosions, or the sight of dead men. Those things were terrible, yes, but for me, the hardest part was carrying decisions that never fully ended. At Prasaut, we fired when men needed us. We held fire when the coordinates looked wrong. We kept the gun alive when the radio died. I dragged Tam out of the open when part of me knew the infantry still needed another round. None of those choices felt clean. War rarely gives a man a clean choice. It gives him mud, noise, bad information, and a few seconds to decide what kind of burden he will carry afterward. Hung survived the war and went back to teaching for a while. He wrote me once, years later, in careful handwriting that looked exactly like the marks he used to make on our firing maps. He said students never understood why he paused before answering hard questions. I understood. He had learned at Prasaut that one wrong answer could travel farther than any shell. Tam did open a repair shop, though not right away. Fever followed him for years, and his hearing never fully came back in one ear. When I visited him after the war, he laughed and told me my first repair was still free. Then he charged me for parts anyway. That was Tam. War took something from him, but it did not take his stubborn humor. Loy was different. He kept the dented canteen until the day he died. His family later gave it to me because, they said, he had told them I would know what it meant. They were right. That canteen sits on a wooden shelf in my house now. One side is crushed from an old blast. Another side is scraped raw from the mortar barrage near Prasaut Bridge. The strap is not original anymore. Loy fixed it with wire that night as we withdrew, and I never replaced it. There are newer bottles, cleaner bottles, lighter bottles. None of them matter. Sometimes my grandson picks it up and asks why I keep such an ugly old thing. I tell him it once held water for 4 thirsty men in a place where water, like hope, had to be shared carefully. I tell him it knocked against Loy's radio while he fought static and fear. I tell him it was lying in the mud when we left the gun position, and somehow it still did not leak. I do not tell him everything. A child does not need the full weight of an old war. But I tell him this much. Artillery was never just about firing shells. It was about trust. The men at the bridge trusted us to be accurate. We trusted the voices on the radio. Tam trusted me to pull him out. I trusted Hung to make the hard calls. And all of us trusted one another enough to keep moving when fear should have frozen us in place. That is what remains after the noise fades. Not victory speeches. Not maps. Not even the bridge itself. Just a dented canteen, the smell of wet earth, and the faces of men who once stood beside me in the hellfire of Prasaut.